I thought the building is great. The area around it's really intriguing. There's a lot of dilapidated houses and stuff like that, and you've got this giant new building with this beautiful facade on it, and that's attached to like an '80s kind of tan khaki building too. So I had a lot of stuff in mind when it came to making this piece. It's got 3 chairs underneath of it, kind of sitting on top of each other, and then I use this drainage tubing going around. My idea was that the 3 chairs would be representing the old buildings that are around the area, and all buildings have chimneys and everything, so these kind of, I was thinking about chimneys when I put these on. But as I was making it, I'm looking at it and I'm like, this looks more like a giant heart, you know? I mean, it's a vascular building. It's got arteries and veins coming out of the heart, and so I just started doing that, and then with the saran wrap, or the shrink wrap, the way I was twisting it and forming it so it was extra tight, started creating all these veins and stuff like that. So actually kind of after the fact that I made it, it kind of came out with its own idea and not what I intended to in the first place. So it's got a couple of different meanings to it.
When I'm building the composition, I can't speak. I usually don't even breathe. I'm building the form and I'm unable to concentrate on anything else. This is the first time I'm taking architectural elements and adding them to the work, which I find extremely challenging. There's something built into the human experience that informs a general agreement for what's beautiful, as there's a general response for disgust when something is ugly. There's something built into the human experience that informs a general agreement for what's beautiful, as there's a general response for disgust when something is ugly. My most important development as an artist happened after I was able to graphically engage the visceral experience of disgust at the very point of transfiguration, and when I allowed myself the freedom to explore these authentic forms. There was this moment of discovery, and I abandoned my compulsion to figuratively and conceptually render beauty. I've always been enamored by architecture. While I'm working, the lines are controlling me that I've established with removable strings for the architectural elements. But as I'm working, I'm not thinking of architecture. I'm thinking of the bodily. Working in abstraction of what's we consider ideal. This is not something I consider taking any patience. It's constantly changing, patience for me is something I need when there's something repetitive.
Painting that I do, it works really intuitively. I just kind of, of course I think a little bit about composition, but a lot of times it just kind of happens. I was really intrigued by the idea for the show, the overall concept, and when I saw the image of the building, and I thought, ooh, wow, that'll be something really different for me. I mean, same in that it's architecture, but very different because it's very modern and it's not residential, and it's just something a little new for me. When I finally saw it, I was really almost puzzled as to where the photographer who took the shot for the publicity of the building, where they shot it from. It just looked so different. The building, when I saw it, felt hidden almost, that you couldn't even really see the great architecture, the elements that were there. I really liked the curved parts. And so I decided that rather than, since when I'm painting buildings, I don't really paint them realistically anyway. I break them down in different ways. I thought, well, I'm going to take a bunch of shots, different angles, different viewpoints, and just go home and see what I have to work with. And so what I ended up coming to want to deal with is really breaking it down into different parts and, zooming in on particular, areas of the building rather than dealing with the whole big structure. So my approach has just been to get in there and really emphasize the curves of the building. Yeah, so these were the ones, I had more shots too on my computer, but these were the ones that, I just love, the way that the perspective is so extreme and further emphasizing this kind of curvy elements, and then this here. So, taking bits and pieces from various places, like this going there and, that coming from, gosh, I don't even know where anymore. It just becomes its own sort of animal, which, I'm really interested in that development. I always start with this ultramarine base, and but it also seemed to just kind of fit with the building itself and the day that I was dealing with. The gray skies are definitely, part of this, because I don't always know exactly what's going to happen. And I'm not like a sketcher, planner type painter. And with this building, it's really just more of like a formal exercise, which I love, which I like that. It's almost like a still life.
At first I thought that, it was a strange fit for me because it's an architecture, responding to architecture, and that's not typically something that I do. But I thought about some of the medical related pieces that I have made, in particular with the liquids and the IV drip. And so I started sort of from that natural position of what kind of live projection could I do. And I started looking at bottles, and it was really through investigating bottles that I might use that I got onto the subject of old medical bottles and the content of those bottles. In the 19th century, this regional area had about 30 different local druggists, chemists, doctors who had their own remedies that they produced and marketed. And so that became my focus for how to take that older medicine and relate it to contemporary times using the building as a form. In 1912, there was a ruling by Congress that prohibited the use of the word cure on bottles because people were it was really getting out of hand. I mean, these miracle cures were coming out, and people were using that instead of going to doctors. And some of those cures were effective, and some of them were not. And it's probably through that process of trial and error that spurred on medicine that we know today. So I took the classic shot from Main Street with the very sort of space age lines, and that is the main outline of the piece. I like the landscape of the bottles, that it's like a cityscape that forms when they're horizontal, but I also like this change up that happens if this were to be mounted on the wall. They're close regional. Let's see. This one is from Binghamton. I have a couple from there. I have a few Cure bottles. Again, Cure, a bottle that says Cure on it, it means it's pre-1912. And, you know, it's really amazing to think that, you know, the promise of a cure could just come in in something, you know, this big.
And the basic premise of this is that it's about slowing time down. Of course, Buffalo is known for its classic architecture, and this was a brand new thing, something that we'd noticed going up and down Main Street as it was being built, and young Parker would refer to it as the Christmas building when it was just the skeletal structure and had all the work lights up on it. Of course, I went directly to one of my many pinhole cameras, and you know, I've been doing this for a number of years, building boxes and making photographs with paper negatives. And the basic premise of this is that it's about slowing time down. And I had been working in high technology and being burned out by it, and this was a way to escape, to go backwards, to get one piece of paper and put it in a homemade box with a pinhole. And in this case it's a stereoscopic camera, which is the thing that I thought of immediately, because when you put this in here, you're not making a snapshot, you're gathering light. So the whole process has to slow way down, because a paper negative has a really slow relative speed, so it takes a long time to gather the light. And when you process it, you get this great fuzzy image. It all has a relative fuzziness. And it no longer is about detail, it's now about nuance. So you take this paper negative and you process it and you make a contact print from that. And so what I thought was, in regard to the architecture of Buffalo and having this old reference in most people's minds, and you're challenging us with something that's brand new, I thought, well, I'll bring this camera out and I'll set up sort of a pictorialist scene where you've got a parlor and a scene in a parlor, and then out the window I will take a second shot of the brand new building and sort of force it, sort of when worlds collide. This is just a prototype of it. So this is a stereoscopic pinhole view of an interior parlor scene that's definitely from a previous century. And then out the window you've got this brand spanking new, almost spaceship-like thing that has landed across the street. And when you look through the little viewfinder, a little pair of glasses that you can look through, and when you look through, you get a real distorted sense of perspective, with the child in the front, the woman reading the book in the middle ground, and then out the window is this brand spanking new thing from the 21st century. So I like the idea of juxtaposing that, referencing the history of Buffalo's glory days and the architecture that we know, and then inserting this element of now, all within the context of the thing that I love to do, which is pinhole photography. I've always worked small. I've always wanted to work small because I want it to be a one-on-one experience. I mean, actually, the biggest thing I've ever done was a billboard alteration, which was just random, you know, vandalism. It wasn't really artwork. But I've always worked small because I've always wanted the experience to be one-on-one. And I think with this, because only one person can look through the viewer at a time, it really achieves that. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Well, when I first got the invitation to be part of this show, I really didn't know what to do. So I just decided that I would go down there and bring my camera and just poke around and do a little visual research, basically. And the building is gorgeous, and I love it formally. I love the blue, and I love the kind of modern lines and the rounded edges on it. And but I started to kind of look around the building too, and one of the first things I actually noticed was that there was this there was a lot of erosion in the roads surrounding the Vascular Institute, and I had done some work in the past involving road erosion and cracks in the road. A photo series that I did last January, finding little heart-shaped cracks in pavement in various places, mostly up here in Niagara County, but I think I did some of those down in Buffalo too. But I also, a couple of years ago, had shot some footage with my Super 8 camera of some cracks in the road down in Buffalo, in the grain elevators area, like down there, and also some that I shot up here out in front of the building that we're in right now, which is an old grain mill. And so I had this old footage, and so I've been thinking about these cracks in the road for a while. So when I saw this one crack running along, I guess it's the north side of the building. There's this road that's pretty well traveled, and then on the other side there's some kind of housing across from there, and this crack was just, I don't know, I just got really fascinated by it, and I started to think about the idea of a crack in the road being this like visually very similar to a vein. And how the way that the cracks happen is through weathering, which is the action of liquid through these cracks, and the cracks get bigger and bigger and break apart more and more as more weathering happens, which happens a lot in Western New York too. So I was thinking about also the road itself being kind of a vein of commerce, or a vein of people moving, basically. And so I decided that I was going to concentrate on this crack in the road for this image. And what I decided to do was to take a series of images that I was going to connect into a panoramic image. And I've been working that way on a series this past year of pictures that I've been shooting in yards and parks and things. And so I've been stitching images together for a while now. And so it all sort of, all these ideas that I've been working with, both physically and conceptually, kind of were brought together in this moment when I was staring at this crack in the street in front of the Vascular Institute. So that's where it all came from.
Okay, so I'm making these, well, it'll be one, I guess, a QR code, which was something I was thinking about before this project. Well, thinking about working with images in some kind of different way, and just thinking about the way QR codes kind of mask information, but also, of course, give you a different kind of access to it. But hadn't really figured out how that worked until you sent out the proposal for this project. Then I started thinking about architecture and facades, and how facades operate as a way to reveal information about a building or hide information about a building. Certainly with this building, I think that one could say that the architects were certainly thinking about how that facade operated as a way to sort of make the building public, so that there's clearly very public spaces that are revealed through the facade, and then there's very private spaces that are sort of hidden by the materials of the facade. And then also particularly the way it illuminates at night, that becomes much clearer. that to me relates in a way to the sort of how we access images, and how images also operate in a way to both sort of give information, but also can withhold information. You know, images can be private, and then private images can also become public. So I'm making QR codes, which will then have images that are accessed through the QR code. I'm working with celebrity images, found images, which is something I'm not dealing with the formal structure of the building at all. Okay. I'm just thinking about how the facade of that building particularly operates, as opposed to these positive and negative spaces as a way to. I'm interested in the sort of architectural theory and the way that the way a building operates theoretically. And there's always, a building always has, architecture, not necessarily a building, but architecture has, just like art, it has multiple audiences. There's the people that use it, there's the people that are going to appreciate it as architecture, and there's people that are going to think about it as architecture, and then there's people that are going to respond to kind of the design theory behind it. So I guess the first thing that this building made me think of, other than the fact that I find it aesthetically pleasing, particularly for a kind of a recent history of boring architecture in Buffalo, that I was interested in the way that they had thought about the facade. I am kind of fascinated with tabloid and celebrity photography, and in some ways that relates totally, I think, to photographs I take, which are in some ways you could consider them, the fire photographs, as kind of tabloid imagery to some degree. For these celebrities and these quote unquote tabloid photographs and the celebrity nudes in particular, and there's this whole sort of culture of images that exists. So these are theoretically private moments that are becoming public through photography, but they're also very public people who are also aware to some degree of what they're doing. So are these really, in fact, private photographs, or is this just part of their sort of public persona that they no longer know how to operate in private? I'm interested in the layers of that, and I think that's part of sort of masking that within this QR code, and then the QR code is made up of the colors from the actual photographs. I'm trying to find a way to sort of kind of reveal those sort of layers of accessibility to those images, I guess. And also sort of the notion of, again, of these images in particular make me think about sort of the boundary between public and private. And so in this case, in these images, it's really ambiguous. It's not clear. Whereas this building, for example, the architects are trying to be very clear about what is public space and what is private space.
So I took maybe a different approach with that theme of the show, and I was focusing on the picture of my eye. And just recently I went to eye doctor, and she took some images of the back of my eye, and for me there's like almost like supernova, just maybe something which is unbelievably sharp with all veins and the colors. It's so inspiring, and I start brainstorming what I can do with those two images, and the veins and all the colors which are on the images. Those are so interesting. So I usually do with layers, and I feel like because somehow I was going inside into my eye, and so the very first approach was working with the layers, just to have around maybe 100 images, and start tearing from the center, and you know, slowly coming out, and almost like the come out something like a lens. Depth of the piece is very interesting. All the tearing elements on the piece are so interesting. Everything is related to each other, and plus, if we are looking to the piece, every single element on the image actually just continue from the center to the sides of the project. Another one was the just maybe shape of the eye, and just to layering and the gluing all those cutting, sliding the slides, make slides, and after just attaching this on the side. Another idea is to work with the black and white image, which is this one here, and I will do something similar what I will do on this one here. I feel like the eye is most important organ in our body, in the head, because we absorb so much. You know, we're looking to our surrounding. We see things. Everything actually reflects in our brain, and after we react to everything what we see. And this is my approach. I think this is something what I am trying to do. So I feel like this is for me as an artist, it's so important to to absorb and just also reveal these in my artworks. So I feel like this will be happening in the future.
I've always worked with architecture, it seems. I keep going back to it time and time again, which is one half of my practice. The other half deals with the landscape. So here's a very rectangular building that has this lovely sinuous line that goes throughout. And for me, vascular then became body. Body becomes, there's a sense of a body, just the vascular system that goes throughout us. It's life. I've been thinking about just that sense of home, of space, of protection, coziness, things from this huge big building with this immense organic space to it. I keep thinking smaller and smaller and smaller as to what is protection, what is life, what is health. And so I've really taken the idea of this show and worked somewhat internally, perhaps about body and about the vascular system within each of us. Yeah, the process I'm going to present my work with are cyanotypes. And it is a formula that back in the day, blueprints were actually, architectural blueprints were made from. And it's a non-silver photographic process that is definitely drawing with light. Traditionally, it was exposed to sunlight because it really needed a bright light source. The chemicals, even though they are light sensitive, you can paint them onto paper, which is usually the substrate used. Traditionally, they were used with negatives, and so you were kind of married to that particular size, whether it was a 120 film or an 8x10 film. But now we can do it digitally. It's a little bit of a hybrid. You can take digital images, print them out as transparencies on whatever size printer you can get, and then use larger sheets of watercolor paper to expose them to the light.
At first I was really trying to think about the architecture and thinking about how I would respond to the architecture, and I've never been much of a guy who likes buildings. But what I thought about also that kind of got echoed by the structure was me thinking about sort of like the next step in the future. And it was something I was thinking about in the last couple of years with some of the work I've been doing, and sort of what are the next steps that are taken with the explosion of medicine and different kinds of technology and this exponential growth. And I started thinking about my father, who has had 2 heart attacks, and like my family and all the hearts in my family. And then I started thinking about me and my brother, or my brother and I. And so I started thinking about making this piece that was about these doomed hearts. So it's this sort of portrait collage of my father, myself, and my brother, but we are this sort of amorphous, doomed heart person. So I was thinking about, you know, what happens next, you know, with places like this vascular spot, and what's going to be done with hearts, and are we doomed? You know, the family history is a big part of that, and it's like this looming dark cloud. So that's where my mind went immediately, and that's what I've been working on. It's also on Mylar. It's a few layers thick though. I started playing with layering up the Mylar and doing drawings and paintings on both sides, so that I can sort of shift where the layers are at all times to see what gets pushed back and what comes forward. It's a little bit frosted, not really heavily, but it's a little bit frosted, and it really helps with pushing things forwards and backwards through the layers. Well, I've been thinking about like just the way some of the lines are going in the actual building, but I wasn't really interested in trying to represent the building itself. But the structure, thinking about the structure as like this sort of futuristic looking thing with the whole next step of evolution thing, that's where I see the building fitting in, and you know, with some of the line work I've been doing in it.
For Vascular Modes, the painting that I had done is titled Deathbed. And when I was asked to do Vascular Modes, it brought me back to this painting that I had done in 2011, which was entitled Survival Pack. And for that painting dealt with my family history of heart disease and the psychology of having this possible impending doom, you know, so to speak, on the horizon. And so for that painting, what I had done was I had strapped myself into a backpack that was made completely up of ICU equipment, with the intent that by hooking myself up to this equipment prematurely while I'm healthy and young, that it was almost a preventative measure to keep me from ever actually having to need the equipment. So really the painting was about fear, and about how fear gets in the way of us being able to live our lives to our fullest potential, you know, so to speak. So for this painting, for Vascular Modes, I wanted to approach that topic from the other side of fear, having to do with getting really sick and being hospitalized, and that's financial and dealing with medical bills and those kinds of issues. I've always found it to be a really heavy circumstance that when somebody gets seriously ill, they not only have to deal with the stress of the illness itself and the emotional toll and physical toll that takes, but they also have to deal with the stress of having to pay the medical bills, pay for the treatment that they need, and this often leaves people with having to make hard choices in terms of their treatment, and often gets in the way of them being able to recover to their fullest potential. For Deathbed, the Vascular Institute becomes a shrub or a bush, a sort of, you know, a piece of landscaping that looks really, really nice, but inevitably serves the function of being a comfortable place to lie under when animals need a place to go die. So that's my explanation of. I actually don't draw too much. Everything that I do, I take a lot of photographs and I manipulate things and do everything in Photoshop, and then come out with my maquette and work from that. Yeah, I went and actually photographed it myself. It was actually kind of The building was actually very limiting in terms of the angle that you could actually get an entire picture of the entire building, just because it's so large. There's so many other structures and things that sort of start to get in the way once you get far back enough to get the entire thing in. So
I don't know if this will show up in the video.
so
It's pretty faint. I was redrawing the drawing of the piece, but if you can see this, like this would be the front, and this side right here is the beginnings of, or this is the beginnings of that side right there. So what I'm trying to do is make a slot machine in the fashion of the Gates Vascular Institute. The idea with using a slot machine was I was thinking about the medical industry, and particularly its recent proliferation in Buffalo, and how that pairs against like similar investments that other cities have made. Like I read about Houston making like an investment recently in a medical industry, and them having like notoriously the largest in the country, and then Boston having the most specialized, or having certain specialties that other cities don't have, and that's sort of the draw. And like Buffalo won't necessarily compete with those, but they're still kind of going through this investment, which is like an investment trend for cities, like as a medical and education, where like these touted as these sort of saving graces, and particularly in alien cities like Buffalo. And so like we're going through with it, we're consolidating our medical corridor, but it's to some degree a gamble, because maybe eventually the investment won't pay off, or once the baby boomer patient wave kind of dies down, it might not be as lucrative of an industry. So that's one impetus for the slot machine. And then the other is just as a reference to money in general, and like the building is pretty fantastic. I actually really do like the design, but it is pretty extravagant. And I remember like going to the hospital once and thinking like, the bills here are so high, if this building was a little bit worse, my bills might be a little bit cheaper. And so that's the second sort of reference to money changing hands with the slot machine. Is just referencing like the cost of medical care, its lack of availability of a lot of people, and like, and then in the context of a building this nice and this new, which is a fantastic building, but I still would like approach it with skepticism. And so it's going to be like more like a theater prop, so hollow on the inside. But I'm trying to make it like at least like visually kind of convincing, even though like you're never going to believe that's actually a slot machine. But like, you know, having the handle, having the change tray. I made a little here. I'll grab it real quick. There's going to be another cut in from this side, right about here. And that's going to have like some lights, and then this is like the little coin insert thing that I made, wooden spray paint. What I'm hoping is that I like the pairing of the plywood with the nice birch wood, and then the facade is going to be something like half inch or a quarter inch ply. I started with an idea of like building like a model kind of like this, but where I remake the medical corridor with elements of Las Vegas in it, and that's kind of where the slot machine came from, because I started talking about I wanted to mix Las Vegas and the medical corridor, but I thought it would be kind of cutesy, like because it would be I'm recreating the space as another space. It just seemed like it wasn't like the strongest idea, and so I started with a sculptural idea, and I think that's where my brain stayed for this project. And so then I decided I should probably another route would be to like just focus on one element from like Las Vegas or that sort of environment, and then pair it with the aesthetic of the Vascular Institute. And so that's why I settled on this. And like I could have painted it, but it seemed like it would be more interesting as an object.
The building seems so like early 2000s to me, late 90s. It just seems so like mod. Like when I used to go to these bars in Brooklyn that had that clipped corner everywhere, you know? And everything was clean and white. So it is funny to see it go up there when I saw it go up. Also, it was like kind of shocking, right? And Buffalo is like the definition of lag time, isn't it? Like if something's happening somewhere, it's going to take 10 or 20 years in Buffalo or more. But then on the other hand, it gives it its incredible charm. Everything that happens is like grassroots. It feels always less top down or something. And I thought about that, and I thought, oh, I could draw this building in the same way, but all the drawings that I used to do of buildings, I think were
definitely meant to kind of undercut their authority. And I don't feel like I need to like go out of my way to undercut the authority of this building, you know? So they were like TV tower, like some super phallic structure, or something that seemed to me sort of like slightly broken or non-functional, or like the Department of Energy or the UN or something that just was like, should be, or well, is authoritative, but you know, but this feels like its own little thing. It's sort of popped up amongst empty lots right next to Main Street, right? I mean, the stuff that I've been thinking about is more, I've been thinking a lot about Rackstraw Down's work, and I've been thinking about how to be more involved in looking directly, less from mediation, less from photographs, or doing a little more looking from life or plein air work. So that's been more what I've been thinking about, and I've been thinking about that in terms of the Buffalo landscape. It's also been in the back of my mind for a number of years, and I've made, you know, gone around and made sketches of sort of brown fields and these in-between spaces. So the stuff that I was thinking about for doing a drawing was, you know, getting even more of maybe the parking lots, or like the old buildings around, or the mismatched architecture that would set this off in some way. I mean, that was sort of where I, you know, I'm very struck by the clipped corners, because I think we don't have any other clipped corners in Buffalo, right? But that, I think, you know, those kinds of things, I'm not sure that my drawing would, I don't know, it depends on how it works out in the end. How my hand would serve that. I think my line work tends to put a point of tension in things that are very rigid. And I like that, the way that happens. And I know when things get a little more organic, the line work tends to reinforce the organic nature of something. So if I draw a tree, it looks as much like a tree as anything, even though it's totally wrong and off. And if I draw a building or rectangle, it looks really wonky. You know, I've been sitting in my car and checking out the scene and thinking about, I sit in my car and do the drawing. And it's fun to, even just to like drive around or walk around the building and really look at, I mean, the first view, well, the two views that I'm sort of most struck by at this point are the field in front of the building, that sort of empty lot, and then behind the building, all that kind of junk behind the building. You know, here you have this like beautiful thing, and then you have the big generators and structures that are, you know, less than like a beautiful modern, postmodern form.
Well, in the absence of specific instructions for putting together the art, I had to I was deciding which way to go, like more formal, referencing the structure itself, using the structure, photographing the structure. I had to experiment for quite a while and play with things, but the title of the show is in the end sort of directed me more than, well, I mean the building and the title are similar in that the Vascular Modes, it's a Vascular Institute, the building's built for a specific function. It's not a building that's been adapted, it's not an office building that can have multiple uses. It's not like a big box store where they build it and it's temporary and they tear it down and build another big box store, and the structure other than the facade is sort of negligible. The building itself is basically a machine, just like a lot of the hospitals in that area now. Any of the modern hospitals, you can't really... It's difficult to adapt a pre-existing structure, I would think, to be a modern hospital. There's just so much machinery, so many systems involved in a contemporary hospital that it itself is relatively unique when it's built and unique for a specific purpose. And, with form following function, I mean, it is a pretty looking structure. It's very high-tech and scientific. It looks like some sort of machine, from the outside, like a fancy desktop case for your computer or whatnot. But in the inside, the guts itself is a sort of functional machine. So with that, I was trying to figure out what I could build that would sort of reference that. But also, my primary training has been in photography. This isn't photo necessarily, but a lot of my work tends to revolve around imagery, and whether it's a captured image or projected image or just simply created image. This is sort of the guts of the machinery that's going to be in the gallery space, but it's more about the image that's being projected on the screen. and reacting to something that's image and not thing in and of itself. Like standing outside of the building, you see the building and you sort of guess what's on the interior of the building. I built this relatively elaborate mechanism on the inside, basically to produce this image that's on the screen. And it's a little bit of the shadow box theater kind of imagery. Imagine too it's going to be red liquid, not clear liquid. Also, I didn't want to be too cliched with the vascular modes and blood. The show sort of coincided with a lot of the press coming out about Lance Armstrong and the Tour de France. And I find that kind of thing a little bit fascinating. The idea that you would spend weeks pumping blood out of your body, storing it in bags in a refrigerator, and then pumping it back into yourself just before the race to improve your performance. And that's illegal and you're not supposed to do it in competition, but at the same time it's a little bit of impressive, the dedication to withdraw your own blood and pump it back in order to win a race. That's almost like, yes, it's bad and you should have your title stripped or whatnot, but at the same time, well, that's pretty impressive that you'd have the discipline to remove your blood stored and then pump it back into yourself. Also the idea that you can take this sort of living thing blood out of you and keep it in cold storage like cheese in the cellar, and then putting it back into you, and this continues to be this sort of living organism, this extension of yourself that you're removing and pumping back in. Well, I also think there's a difference between the thing and the image of the thing. Like, this is basically the mechanism to create an image, and the image is sort of appearing on the screen. And so it's sort of a little bit of a reveal from the image to the mechanism. Because to a certain extent, it's kind of important for people to know how things work. I mean, it's not simply image that people like to respond to, but image that they can understand. At least get a little bit of a hold on. Because if it's just completely abstract image, you're not nearly as invested in it, and you don't really care why the image exists. Whereas if you can get at least a hint of why the image exists, what is the mechanism behind the image, then you're a little bit more interested, a little more, your curiosity is a little more piqued. And it sort of allows you to figure out what you're looking at.
So when I first got the invitation to be in the show, I was in the neighborhood, so I went and drove over to the building right away to see what it was like. And because I had experience with working in an architectural firm, that was kind of exciting also. And the building was interesting. I liked kind of the surface texture, the glass, how it kind of faded in and out. I thought that was pretty interesting. But I came back a couple weeks later with my camera and just shot a bunch of video of it and waited for security to come out and ask me what was going on, but nobody did. And I just kept getting closer and closer and closer, and then went inside and talked with the lady that was sitting at the reception desk and said, "Would you mind if I took some pictures?" Anyway, so, and I wasn't doing anything special. I was just kind of like pointing and shooting. I usually want to set up cameras and tripods and everything, but I took my iPhone, which is kind of fun. And so just started shooting. I was walking around and held the camera up and walked down the hallways up and around. And knowing that I would do something like this, I started working with this idea of manipulating the imagery on an earlier project and thought it would make a lot of sense for this. So wanted to see how far I could go with this idea of vascular, and it kind of felt right for the type of material I was doing, the type of imagery that I was interested in, and the building and the use of the building. I like the idea that we're talking about the use of vascular in the sense of what the building is. It's for understanding the heart, working on the heart, and at the same time, architecturally speaking, buildings are these gigantic vascular entities, right? And they've got veins and arteries and valves and doors and hallways, And so I think when I started working on this, it was very much that it had to have valves in it. It had to be something that opened and closed. I knew that it was going to be organic. I didn't know how far it would go. Through the process, it just kept getting more and more internal, more and more. I don't know if realistic is the right word, but it certainly, I think, is something that I was trying to make it visceral. I was trying to make it kind of be something that would make people pause a little bit. I like being able to do that if I can. It's strange that you say Giger-esque because, yeah, I can see that. And certainly when I was a young art student, I was, as most young art students are, were infatuated with him. And I have tried so hard to, like, get away from that. But, yeah, it does kind of, I can see that. So, yeah, this ended up being, this was that raw footage of the interior of the Gates Vascular Hospital. And through the manipulation of the image with a lot of custom made and custom designed filters and effects in Final Cut, that evolved from that footage. And I think that for me is a process that I really enjoy. I like seeing how far you can push the imagery, how far you can create something new from this raw material. To me, it's very much like sculpture, where you're building something out of raw material. As I watched this, it felt very much like it was. There was a very literal interpretation of vascular. There was a very literal interpretation of valves and what happens within the body, and at the same time, it was abstracted. And so it was kind of this strange, abstracted, illustrative kind of imagery. But I like that. I like the tactile quality of doing that. I think that, for me, is it goes back to that sculptural kind of tool, or that aspect that I come from.
The thing that I find really interesting about that area where the building is located is all these public housing that's around there. And so what I'm doing is taking a specific like 7-unit housing area that I think is really interesting because it's being demolished, and using those materials in the formalistic style of that architecture versus the architecture of the building, to juxtapose them, just to create some sort of tension and play between this like really artificial thing that just sort of springs up and changes the landscape. So it's more about the relationship between those buildings, and you know, there's deeper lying ideas underneath with like political structures and social economics of that area. But so yeah, so I'm just playing with the actual, this is one of the houses quickly drawn out of the housing, the public housing that's sort of in limbo right now. And so what I want to do is use a lot of this shingles and the color of the shingles and how ragged it is. Oh, well, this is something that I was playing around with because I wanted to make the houses look like something from a distant past or a dream. So I thought maybe having light behind the shapes and forms of the building would be nice. But it sort of turned out like a Christmas wreath. I might have the building like melting, or I guess we'll see.
So when I have to admit, with this project, I put off thinking about it for a very long time after, you know, being approached. Because I had a lot of other creative projects that were going on. So it was sort of a couple of weeks of trying to think about what I was going to do. And initially I thought I would try to do something where I kind of pulled this into my normal body of work, which is my most recent kind of ongoing project is called Secondary Occupants, Collect and Observe. It kind of deals with animals in architecture, particularly spiders, insects, and how they sort of live in this sort of semi-symbiotic relationship with us. And I thought I could maybe investigate the building from that angle. But as time went on, that idea seemed less appealing to me, and I thought I would maybe just try to do something different, like not what I outside of my normal work. So I decided to do just a much more direct kind of representation of the building. And a lot of my work involves graphic design and kind of this crossover between art and graphic design. And in my Secondary Occupants project, I kind of deal with, make these fake books that have modernist covers that kind of are these simplified images of buildings and relationships. So where was I? So anyway, so I do, there's a lot of graphic design in my artwork. And I'm a graphic designer, and I have a series of projects that sort of bridge this sort of space in between. So I decided to actually make a painting, but painting only in the... So I decided to take a more graphic approach to representing the building. So sort of above the building, is this sort of kind of cryptic symbol that relates to sort of maybe vascularity and blood and all of that in a very clean kind of modernist way. I was just sort of interested in making an object that kind of represented the building and had a kind of presence, and I don't normally work with paint, and I don't normally, I usually make prints or work with fabric and other things, so this is a new medium for me, and so I just wanted to experiment with something that I hadn't done before. I guess this is my first official painting, but I really would like to lower expectations on that front. It's not a medium that I'm, particular. It's not, it's just, a lot of this was I was kind of like trying to use things I could find around the house. So I had this blank door that I'd used as a table, and I decided to use that as the, as the canvas. Sort of finding paint and things, trying to make something out of what I could find.
When I was asked to be a part of this project, I was excited, no, let me start again. So I think what I ended up making for this show kind of was in line with sort of my first reaction to when I heard when I was invited to be part of it, which I guess has a lot to do. I've definitely noticed this building before, and it's kind of hard not to notice it. It's this this kind of shiny object amidst Section 8 housing on one side, the fruit belt on the other, and then just whatever 19th century housing. So I think it's a very satisfying looking building, well, I guess I like the fact that there's kind of new architecture in Buffalo. I think that's refreshing. As much as I really love the kind of Victorian era housing stock as well, but sometimes it's nice to see something else. My initial reaction was kind of thinking about this sort of object in this context of this neighborhood. I went to the site a lot. I filming and just kind of walking around it. Just kind of thinking about, how it occupies that space and how it relates or doesn't relate to the neighborhood. And it is, I guess, it's a statement, the shapes and the textures of that building versus everything else. So I just, that was definitely something I was thinking about and wanted to play with. I guess part of what I arrived at or decided on was kind of thinking about presenting these different points of view of the building, just literally, in space, but then also, how it's perceived or fits or doesn't fit. Yeah, I was filming the building with my video camera, but then was actually approached by their security, Kaleida Health security, and asked to stop filming because they said it was private property or something like that. So I was halted in that effort for, I think it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks. So in the meantime, I guess, riffing off a lot of these architectural 3D animations of buildings, like thinking about that, but doing it in this sort of very low tech way. So I decided to do, rotoscope it, just, with printed out photographs that I took of the building and then traced it and rephotographed the trace. And that was an interesting process to me, because, and kind of a surprising one in that the photographs I took, which the video is in the project as well, but the photographs I took were, sometimes you had a clear view of the building, other times it was obscured. So when I printed them and traced them, I was tracing. Sometimes I was tracing, pretty clear, the clear form of the building. Sometimes I kind of had to imagine what it looked like. So I was sort of filling in, or just leaving out stuff altogether. And I thought that, to me, that was this interesting sort of process or negotiation between what you imagine something is and how it actually is, which I think to me has to do with also the design of the building and this idea of it, it's sort of futuristic looking, right? The animation is certainly based on my walking around through the neighborhood, photographing the building. For me, the main interest was it as a landscape or cityscape. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about how that building sits in that landscape. I don't think the building, to me, doesn't work. I suppose my ambivalence toward it. I think as a design, as a structure, it is satisfying. It's nice, right? With any kind of sort of development like that, there's this other. I think it's still to be decided how the medical corridor, will work for the neighborhoods. We're living in the 21st century. There's a contemporary aesthetic that there should be room for.
So when you contacted me about the proposal for the show, I at first was kind of confused because the building's gorgeous and it's kind of an art piece in itself, and I didn't really know where to go from there. But then through, I guess, weirdly devouring nature documentaries and whatnot, there's a segment on how slugs have sex, and it's a weirdly repulsive, but also, it's a completely natural process, and that's kind of, I guess, how I was ending up thinking about hospitals, where, you've got things that, you got people born, you got people dying every day. It's beautiful and repulsive all at the same time. And even the slightly organic shape of the building, how it looks like it's flopped over onto itself, that, to me, made me think of slugs having sex, which might be weird, but it's what I thought of. And even that weird lattice work that's throughout the building, kind of like squiggles, but then layered on top of each other, that too is just, to me, it seems almost, I think that they were thinking about slugs having sex when they built the building, because it just looks perfect, and it's glass and the color white, and the weird sex organs that come out of slugs' heads, like kind of almost have the exact same coloring to it. So what I've been doing is working on clear mylar and just kind of building up the shape of. I'm also using caulking, like a caulking gun to like. It's done on a clear piece of plastic, but it's got black line work and then caulk for the I guess the mucousy parts and the just to give it a feel other than like glass and steel. It's just something else that's like textural that's there, and I guess slugs having sex relates to the Gates Vascular Institute because it's UB and the Gates Medical Group together, like creating this new building, and you know it's in its infancy. But everyone expects great things. It's kind of like they're having a baby together, and I think it's weird. I definitely think that it's kind of a weird way to go from, you know, the initial proposal, but it's the way that I'm going, I guess. But like this is kind of the shape that I was telling you about. So like they make like a helix, and then I've just been like, I feel like it's what was it in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they're just like drawing the mountain over and over again. I think
Well, the exhibition presented for me a chance to think about issues of preservation versus development in the city. I think that you know, if the building stands for anything, that it stands for a kind of tension, a conflict, a contrast between the will and the need to advance, to develop, and the city's simultaneous urge to protect and respect its past. And those forces are so competing here that I've taken the opportunity to think about that tension and that conflict. So this particular piece really deals less with the physical form of the building, but more with that inherent competition that I was speaking about. So there's this kind of armature of an edifice that becomes a support structure for the mechanism that moves forward and that erases, and you know, it's kind of marvelously, precariously supported in a kind of lightweight structure. So I mean, for me, this one kind of suggests a way of thinking about the monumentalizing the act or the will to undo something, and simultaneously to kind of raise that specter up as a kind of new monument in the city. The other piece that I kind of was working on simultaneously is curiously more about the form of the building and less about sign. So, you know, it's this one here where I was kind of thinking about the former residences of the site and kind of moving through them in a kind of zigzag fashion, the way the building's floor plate starts to turn, with this kind of viscera of bodily fluids and organ-like parts, which range from foam insulation to rooftops to candlesticks to ornamental pieces of house. And you know, in this case, I was really thinking about the kind of vascular call and how the kind of undulation of this kind of residua starts to take on a very bodily and kind of visceral quality, even as it starts to kind of snake through the infrastructure of its support mechanism. I mean, I like this. I think the thing is, I like this one probably more because it's more directly related to the kind of, you know, not only the vascular call, but also the kind of physical form of the building, and it kind of, you know, seems to be more more of a response to both issues that I was talking about there, the form as well as the kind of inherent conflict between preservation and progress. But I thought that they could also work well as a pair, depending on how they were sited or how they were positioned, and also how much space.
Drawn to, I'm drawn to form, obviously, and architecture, but not architecture that's occupied. But this was a real challenge for me, because the buildings I photograph they're sort of long gone, and they've already passed a moment where they've gone through a suspension of life and death. So I photograph using digital camera, and the way I usually photograph is I open up my lens and I let things go for about 5 minutes to see what kind of evidence is itself in a piece of work, in an image. And so I took I went sort of straight for the form. I wanted to really kind of see that form face head on, see this large black, or large sort of plane of glass. And so over the course of several weeks, went up and photographed in the same spot from the parking garage overlooking the building. And I just opened the camera and let it go. And this was around the time, right, sort of crossing Hurricane Sandy, which sort of devastated my neighborhood in New York. And I started thinking about what happens in this suspension between life and death. And really, I think that what I wanted to capture with this piece was maybe a moment in a neighborhood which is in some ways transitioning between life and death, and in a way in a city which perhaps is and has been transitioning in many ways between those states. And I've seen humans and animals kind of cross that space. And what I was really interested in this piece was what happens in that space, and can you sort of freeze frame and almost feel like you're looking into a place where you're almost not supposed to linger, which is this sort of life and death suspension. And I'm really interested in that moment where something's just happened and maybe going to happen, and right, it's just the space right in between. I think what was sort of interesting was that this was a study into form, and in this kind of emotional space that I'm working through, it's sort of, what happens where that form and that energy maybe, or that moment intersect. And what started to become really evident was this window kind of overlooking this space. This is a composite of about maybe several hundred photographs over the course of several weeks, maybe 200. I work from a very short exposure and a tight aperture to a very long exposure, 5 minutes. These were all shot at night. I shot them all at night, kind of in the dark. I don't use flash, and I just position the camera in the same space and just open the lens, close the lens, sort of timed it, just 30 seconds, a minute, 5 minutes. And then I just started layering, and I kind of wanted to see where things overlapped. And what happened was there were a few really foggy nights and some rainy nights and some really dark nights, and things just became sort of obliterated. The neighborhood started to disappear, the buildings started to disappear. But I was interested in this one presence, this one form. And what was interesting was that the rest of the neighborhood, the light comes in through this kind of Bauhaus light, window on the side where the glass meets, and I was just drawn to this window that was overlooking, this vessel that contains these moments between life and death, kind of overlooking this neighborhood that's kind of suspended in between those two spaces. It's all there. It's cars going by in the fog, and it's lights from the building in the fog. The only thing is I peeled back a lot of the obliteration just to sort of see the building. I mean, at some point the entire thing was gone, and I kind of put the building back in by erasing what was obliterated. I was interested in what happens when you just keep sort of, I mean, it's time and weather and light composites, and at some point the whole thing is sort of gone, and then I was interested in what happens when you kind of peel back. You start to bring something back into focus. I mean, it's a technical effect. It's a mechanical effect, but there's nothing in there that wasn't there. It's everything is there. Everything that's there was there, but some is more there than others.